I never believed in ghosts. At least, that's what I told myself before I started working the night shift at WZMR 106.7, an old radio station on the outskirts of town. It wasn't a glamorous job, just an overnight DJ gig playing late-night jazz and classic rock for insomniacs and truckers passing through. The place had been around since the 1950s, and it showed. The walls were yellowed from decades of cigarette smoke, the equipment was outdated, and the station had the strange, stale, metallic smell that never quite went away. The first few nights were uneventful. Just me, a coffee-stained playlist, and the occasional drunk caller rambling about how radio had lost its soul. But then, on my fifth night, something changed. It started with a whisper. At first, I thought it was a trick of the headphones. Maybe some static interference. I was queuing up an old Billie Holiday record when I heard it. Faint but unmistakable. A voice, low and breathy, muttering something beneath the music. I pulled off my headphones, my heart hammering. The studio was silent, except for the hum of the old air conditioning unit. I checked the audio levels. Everything looked normal. Maybe I was just tired. But then it happened again. This time, the whisper was clearer, closer. I still couldn't make out the words, but it didn't sound like radio static. It sounded human. A voice just behind my left ear. I spun around in my chair, expecting to see a coworker playing a prank, but the control room was empty. The only other person in the building was Mark, the station manager, who had already gone home for the night. A chill crept up my spine. I tried to shake it off. Old buildings make weird noises, I told myself. The wiring in this place was ancient. Maybe I was picking up a rogue transmission, some random late-night frequency bleeding through. But then the calls started. At exactly 2:13 a.m., the station's phone rang. WZMR 106.7. You're on the air, I said, forcing a casual tone. Silence. Hello? There was a faint crackle, like someone breathing through a bad connection. Then a voice, soft, almost melodic, but wrong. Do you hear them too? I yanked off my headset. My hands felt clammy against the control board. Do I hear what? I hung up. Probably just a prank. But my skin was crawling. I forced myself to focus on the music, on the routine. Play a track. Announce the station ID. Take another call. But as the minutes ticked by, a strange sensation settled over me. A feeling that I was being watched. The glass window, separating the control room from the recording booth, felt darker than usual, like something was just beyond it, watching from the shadows. At 2:47 a.m., the whisper came again. This time, it wasn't under the music. It was coming from the room itself. I felt my stomach drop as I turned toward the microphone. The on-air light flickered for just a second, then steadied. And then, through my headphones, I heard it. A voice, just like mine, repeating my last words back to me. I ripped the headphones off, my breath coming in sharp, uneven gasps. The room was silent again, except for the faint hum of the equipment. My hands trembled as I reached for the volume sliders, convinced that I had somehow triggered an audio loop by mistake. But the levels were fine. No feedback, no playback errors. I wasn't hearing an echo. I was hearing something else. I tried to convince myself that I was just tired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The whisper, my voice, hadn't just repeated my words. It had spoken them before I did. I glanced at the clock. 3 a.m. My shift was halfway over, but the thought of staying in that chair, in that room, felt unbearable. I needed a break, needed to breathe. I pushed back from the console and stepped into the hallway, the dim fluorescent lights flickering slightly overhead. The station was eerily quiet at night, the kind of silence that makes your own footsteps sound too loud. I walked past the old record archives, the break room with its buzzing refrigerator, and stopped at the glass door leading to the lobby. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for my car. The world felt unnaturally still, like everything had paused just outside the station walls. A faint rustling sound came from behind me. I turned quickly, heart hammering. Nothing, just the hallway stretching back toward the studio. But then, as I stood there, listening, I heard it again. A shuffle, a whisper of movement. It was coming from the recording booth. I forced myself to move, to walk back toward the studio, even as every part of my brain screamed at me to leave. The glass separating the control room from the booth reflected the dim lights, and for a moment I saw myself staring back. But as I stepped closer, my breath hitched. There was something else in the reflection. A shadow, tall, thin, standing just behind my chair. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my balance. But the chair was empty. There was no one there. Yet my skin prickled with the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I backed away toward the control panel, my fingers gripping the edge of the desk. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. I reached for the microphone, planning to say something, anything, just to break the silence. And that's when the equipment turned on by itself. The switchboard crackled to life, the soundboard lights flickering wildly. The on-air sign glowed red, even though I hadn't activated it. And then, through the speakers, a voice whispered, "Don't leave." The voice was neither male nor female, but somewhere in between, as if multiple tones layered over one another. It was close, intimate, too real to be a glitch. The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath misted in front of me. The hum of the station static grew louder, morphing into something almost like breathing. I reached for the main power switch. If I could just shut everything down, maybe this would stop. But the moment my fingers touched it, the sound shifted. The whispering grew frantic, overlapping voices tangled together. Too many words at once. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The power cut out completely. The studio went dark. I stood there frozen, gripping the desk so tightly my knuckles ached. Then, in the pitch-black silence, the phone rang. 1, 2, 3 times. My stomach churned. I had no reason to answer it, no reason at all, but something about the ringing felt wrong. Like if I let it go on, something would happen. With a shaky breath, I reached for the receiver and lifted it to my ear. Silence. Then, in the quiet, I heard something so soft, so close, it sent a shiver through my bones. A breath, and then a whisper. "We hear you." I slammed the phone down, stumbling back against the console. My pulse pounded in my ears. I had to get out, had to leave. But just as I turned toward the exit, the power flickered back on. The lights glowed dimly. The equipment hummed to life. The on-air sign still burned red. And in the reflection of the glass, my chair was no longer empty. Someone, something, was sitting in it. My breath caught in my throat. The chair, the same one I had been sitting in minutes ago, was now occupied. A dark figure sat there, unmoving, its back facing me. My own reflection in the glass looked pale, distorted by the dim flickering lights, but the figure's outline was clear. It wasn't just a shadow. It was real. I wanted to run, wanted to escape, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The room suddenly felt thick, as if the air itself had weight, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Then slowly, the chair began to turn. I clenched my fists, bracing for whatever horror was about to reveal itself. But just as the figure should have faced me, the lights cut out again. The station was plunged into absolute darkness. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could still hear the faint hum of the equipment, but no music played, no static crackled, only the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. And then, from right beside me, close enough that I should have felt breath on my skin, a voice whispered, "You were never alone." I staggered backward, a strangled gasp escaping my lips. My hands fumbled for my phone, for any kind of light, but my fingers were too shaky. The darkness around me felt alive, shifting, pressing in. Then, the radio speakers crackled. Not just static this time, a voice distorted but clear. It was an old broadcast. WZMR 106.7, bringing you the smoothest late-night sounds since 1952. I knew that voice. I had heard it before, in old station recordings. Walter Greaves, the man who used to host this very shift decades ago. The one who... My breath hitched. The one who had died in this station. I had read about it briefly during my first week, some old article left in the break room. Walter Greaves, longtime radio host, found dead in the studio during his shift. No one knew exactly what happened. He was alone, like I was now. They had found him sitting in his chair, his mouth open, as if he had been speaking, when his heart stopped. The report said he had a heart attack, a natural death. But the whispers, the speakers crackled again. Can you hear them now? I choked on my breath. That wasn't Walter's voice anymore. That was mine. The station phone rang, loud, jarring. I turned toward it, my body moving on instinct, even though every nerve in me screamed to ignore it. My fingers hovered over the receiver. The ringing stopped. I hadn't touched it, but something clicked on the other end. And then, through the silence, I heard the unmistakable sound of someone breathing. Slow, shallow, not one person. Many, a chorus of breath, as if countless unseen figures were gathered around listening. And then finally, a voice I recognized. Don't let them in. Walter Greaves. My entire body turned ice cold. My pulse throbbed painfully in my neck. I tried to form words, tried to ask who or what was trying to come in. But before I could speak, the glass window between the recording booth and the control room shattered. A burst of icy wind rushed through the studio, sending loose papers flying. The soundboard lights flickering wildly. My ears rang from the impact. Shards of glass littered the floor, but I barely noticed. My eyes were locked on the recording booth. The chair was now empty again, but the door to the booth, it was open. I hadn't touched it. I couldn't stay, not another second. I grabbed my keys from the desk, my hands still shaking, and sprinted for the exit. The hallway stretched ahead, impossibly long, the buzzing overhead lights flickering as I ran. As I reached the lobby door, I heard it one final time. A whisper, right against my ear. We're always here. I didn't look back. I burst into the night air, gasping as if I had been drowning. The parking lot was still empty, my car the only one in sight. I fumbled with my keys, my hands still unsteady, and threw myself into the driver's seat, locking the doors. The station loomed behind me, dark and still. But as I stared at the building, at the glowing on-air sign that had somehow remained lit, I realized something terrifying. Through the shattered window, in the dim light of the control room, my chair wasn't empty anymore. Someone was sitting in it, and they were still speaking into the microphone. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My chest heaved with each panicked breath, my mind racing. I had to leave. I had to get as far away from this place as possible. But no matter how much I told myself to drive, I couldn't take my eyes off the station. Through the broken window, the control room remained dimly lit. The on-air sign still glowed red, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. And in my chair, facing the microphone, someone was still sitting there. I couldn't see their face, but I could hear them. Through the speakers of my car radio, though I hadn't turned it on, my own voice whispered back at me, "You can't leave." A shiver crawled down my spine. My shaking hand reached for the dial, twisting it frantically, but the voice didn't fade. It only grew louder. "You never left." I slammed my fist against the dashboard. The station speakers crackled in response, a distorted noise that sounded almost like laughter. Mocking me, I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered. Failed number, no. I tried again. Nothing. The whispers from the radio turned into overlapping voices. A dozen versions of myself, speaking all at once, echoing things I had never said. Some of them were laughing, some were screaming. I had to get out, had to run. I grabbed my phone, desperate to call for help, but the screen was black, dead, useless, just like the station phone before it. Then suddenly the whispers stopped. Silence. And then, through the radio, a new voice spoke, low, familiar. Walter Greaves. "Don't look back. Just run." I didn't think, didn't hesitate. I threw the car door open and bolted. The night air was sharp in my lungs as I sprinted away from the parking lot, my footsteps echoing in the empty streets. The cold bit into my skin, but I didn't care. I just needed distance. I ran until my legs burned, until my breath was ragged, until the station was nothing but a distant glow behind me. Only then did I stop, my hands on my knees, gasping for air. The streets were deserted. No cars, no people. It was like the entire world had vanished, leaving only me behind. I reached for my phone again, praying it had come back to life. This time the screen flickered on. But something was wrong. The home screen wasn't mine. It was an old rotary-style dial interface. The date at the top read November 12th, 1952. My blood turned to ice. That was the night Walter Greaves died. A notification popped up. One new voicemail. Against every instinct in my body, I tapped it. A faint hiss of static, then, "You took my place." The voice was my own, but it wasn't me. I dropped the phone as a rush of dizziness slammed into me. The world around me tilted, the street lights flickering wildly. The pavement beneath my feet seemed to shift, and for one terrifying moment, I felt as if I were falling. Then everything snapped back to normal. The night was still. The station was gone. Not just far away. Gone. The parking lot where it had stood was empty. Nothing but an overgrown lot with rusted signs and crumbling pavement. As if no one had been there in decades. But my phone, it was still clutched in my shaking hand. The screen had gone dark again, but as I lifted it, the reflection staring back at me wasn't mine. It was Walter Greaves. He smiled, and then he whispered, "Welcome to the night shift."